A group of teenagers ran a small nature vlog, three close friends who shared a love for exploring the wild and capturing everything on camera for their YouTube channel. They weren't famous, just young people who felt alive in the woods, far from phone signals and city lights. That weekend, they decided to camp in an old, abandoned nature reserve on the outskirts of town. The plan was simple: film a few night shots, capture a time-lapse of the stars, listen to the sounds of the forest, and maybe add a little excitement to boost their views. They laughed and joked about ghosts in the woods, or mysterious creatures that might make the video go viral. None of them imagined that this night would be unlike any other. As darkness thickened and the last streaks of daylight disappeared behind the trees, the forest began to breathe in strange rhythms, whispers that seemed to rise from the ground itself. One of their cameras had been set farther from the campsite, pointed toward the open space between the trees, just where the firelight began to fade into shadow, and from that very frame, everything began. The next morning, when they opened the footage, just to color correct and cut clips as usual, all three froze. No one said a word. They just stared at each other, first confused, then pale with fear. And when they reviewed the footage the next morning, they realized something or someone had been watching them all night. They called their channel Wild Path, a name they'd come up with during a summer road trip, sitting in the back of an old van with a borrowed camera and too much curiosity for their own good. The group was small, but tight-knit: Eli, Mara, and Connor. Three friends who had grown up in the same quiet town, spending most of their teenage years wandering the edges of forests, rivers, and abandoned trails that no one else cared to visit. Eli was the one who started it all. At 17, he was already known for his fascination with cameras, always adjusting lenses, experimenting with focus, capturing details others would miss. He wasn't loud or showy. He just had that quiet determination to make something beautiful from places most people ignored. His dream was to study filmmaking, but until then, YouTube was his classroom. Mara, his girlfriend, was the heart of the group. She wasn't as adventurous as the boys, but her calm nature balanced their recklessness. She loved the feeling of cool morning air, the smell of pine and damp earth, the way sunlight flickered through leaves. In front of the camera, she always spoke softly, describing what she saw as if she were telling a bedtime story. Their viewers often commented that her voice made even the most ordinary forest seem alive. Connor was the opposite: loud, restless, always joking to ease the tension. He didn't care much for the technical side of things, but he was the one who kept the mood light. Whenever they got lost, or when the forest grew too silent, he'd start humming or teasing the others. His presence made every trip feel less like work and more like an adventure. Together they had built a small but loyal audience. A few thousand subscribers who enjoyed watching their hikes, campfire chats, and late-night stargazing. The comments were filled with people saying the same thing, that the videos made them feel peaceful, like they were out there in the wild too. Their new project was supposed to be different, a night in the woods special. Eli had bought a new motion-sensitive camera, the kind that could record even the faintest movement in the dark. He wanted to film the forest after midnight, to show how it changed once the world went quiet. Mara wasn't thrilled about staying up all night, but she agreed. Connor, of course, made jokes about catching Bigfoot and making history. They picked a remote forest near the edge of the state, a place locals rarely mentioned anymore. It had once been a ranger's site, decades ago, but after several mysterious accidents, the trails had been closed. Maps still showed the area, but the paths were overgrown, and the last signpost had long since fallen. To Eli, that made it perfect, untouched, authentic, and atmospheric. The morning they left, the sky was pale gray, heavy with mist. They packed their tents, cameras, and snacks, laughing as they argued about who forgot the batteries. It felt like every other trip: easy, exciting, innocent. No one realized that by the time they returned, nothing about Wild Path would ever feel innocent again. By the time they reached the forest entrance, the sun had begun to burn through the morning haze, spreading a golden warmth across the gravel road. The place looked peaceful at first glance, a long stretch of trees arching overhead like a tunnel of green, their leaves trembling in the faint breeze. Eli parked the car near an old wooden sign, half buried in moss, its faded letters barely spelling out the park's forgotten name. They stepped out, stretched their arms, and listened. The forest was quiet, not silent, but heavy, filled with the layered hum of cicadas and the distant call of birds. It felt alive, yet untouched. Connor immediately started filming, turning the camera toward Mara as she smiled shyly into the lens, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her voice was soft when she said, "It's so still here. It feels like time stopped." They followed a narrow trail that wound through thickets of fern and clusters of wildflowers. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in broken patterns, painting the ground with moving shadows. Every few steps, Eli paused to capture shots of mushrooms glowing faintly in the damp soil or the tiny streams trickling over stones. It was the kind of detail he loved, small things most people would never notice, framed perfectly within his lens. Mara walked just behind him, carrying her own small camera to record commentary for their vlog. She talked about the forest's history, how it used to be a ranger station in the 1,970 seconds before being abandoned. Her tone was steady, but there was a subtle edge to her words, a curiosity mixed with unease. Connor, trailing a few steps behind, couldn't resist making light of it. Maybe they left because of bears, he joked, or ghosts, probably both. They laughed, but not loudly. Somehow even laughter sounded different there, smaller, quickly swallowed by the trees. Around midday, they found a clearing beside a shallow creek. The water shimmered under the sunlight, clean and cold. They decided to set up camp there, choosing a spot where the trees formed a natural circle. Eli filmed the process, Connor struggling with the tent poles, Mara arranging the sleeping bags neatly, and himself explaining their night plan to the camera. While recording, a man appeared at the far edge of the clearing, an older local, carrying a small axe and a bundle of firewood. He greeted them kindly, though his eyes held a certain caution. He said he'd lived nearby for years and hadn't seen campers here in a long time. When Eli mentioned they were doing a nature vlog, the man smiled faintly but shook his head. "People stopped coming here for a reason," he murmured. "After dark, this place doesn't sound like the same forest." Eli thanked him and brushed it off, though Mara looked uneasy. Connor made another joke, waving goodbye and promising they'd be fine. As the day stretched on, they filmed the golden light slipping through the branches, the soft ripples of the creek, and the steady hum of insects rising with the heat. Everything seemed perfect for the kind of peaceful outdoor episode they always wanted. But beneath that quiet beauty, the forest seemed to wait, watching, listening, as if holding its breath for what would come after sundown. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the forest transformed. What had been golden and warm only hours before turned into a tapestry of dark silhouettes and shifting light. The air cooled quickly, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Eli adjusted his camera one last time, checking the angles and focus as the sky deepened from blue to black. They had built a small fire in the center of their camp, its orange glow casting moving shadows on their faces. Sparks floated upward like tiny fireflies, disappearing into the darkness above. The camera picked up the crackle of burning wood, the faint buzz of night insects, and the rhythmic trickle of the nearby creek. For a while, it felt calm, the kind of stillness that only comes when the world forgets to move. Mara sat wrapped in a blanket beside the fire, holding a metal mug of hot chocolate. Her voice was gentle as she spoke into the camera about how different the woods felt after dark. "It's like the forest is breathing slower," she said, glancing toward the tree line. "You can almost feel it watching you." Connor laughed softly, tossing another stick into the flames. "That's the point, right? The forest watches us. We watch it. That's balance." He grinned at the camera, trying to keep things light. But even he couldn't ignore the way the night seemed to press closer with every passing minute. Eli was busy setting up a secondary camera, a small motion sensor model he'd recently bought online. He positioned it about 30 yards away, aimed toward the open stretch between the trees. The idea was to capture any movement that happened while they slept, animals, wind, or anything else the forest wanted to reveal. He tested it, saw the red light blink twice, then returned to the fire with a satisfied nod. For a time, they filmed segments for the vlog, the firelight on their faces, the way the forest sounded when they all stopped talking. There were moments of laughter, the rustle of snack wrappers, quiet storytelling under the stars. Everything felt simple again, until the sounds began to change. It started faintly, a soft rhythm that didn't belong to the usual night chorus. Footsteps slow, deliberate, faintly crunching over dry leaves. Mara froze, eyes shifting toward the dark beyond the fire's reach. Connor stopped mid-sentence. Eli turned his camera in that direction, zooming in, but there was nothing there, only darkness. "Probably a deer," Connor muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. They waited, listening. The noise stopped, replaced by the low whisper of wind through the trees. After a few moments, they relaxed, forcing out nervous laughter. Mara exhaled and leaned against Eli's shoulder, pretending not to notice that her hands were trembling. Hours passed. One by one, they grew tired. Connor was the first to crawl into his tent, mumbling something about editing the video in the morning. Mara followed, her flashlight beam cutting a pale line through the dark. Eli lingered near the dying fire, staring at the blinking light of the camera he'd left by the trees. It looked like a single red eye, watching back at him. When he finally went to bed, the forest was silent again, unnaturally so. The fire hissed softly as it died down, leaving only faint embers glowing like scattered stars on the ground. The main camera, still set to record through the night, captured what none of them saw. Around 1:30 a.m., something moved near the edge of the clearing, a shadow gliding just beyond the light, pausing between the trees. The motion sensor blinked, detecting it, and switched on automatically. The lens caught a blur, the outline of a figure standing still, facing the camp, barely visible in the distance. For several minutes, it didn't move. Then, slow and deliberate, it took a step forward. The camera adjusted focus, and a faint reflection appeared, two small points of light, like eyes, staring directly at the lens. Inside the tents, no one stirred. At 2:10 a.m., the sound of fabric rustling broke the quiet. Something brushed against Mara's tent, dragging lightly along the side as if tracing its shape. She shifted in her sleep, unaware. The camera picked up the faint noise, not loud, but distinct, human in rhythm. Then, for a moment, there was breathing, not the slow exhale of wind, but shallow, uneven, close to the microphone. The figure leaned closer to the camera, face just out of focus. Its outline flickered as if the lens couldn't quite capture it. And then, without warning, the recording glitched, static flashing across the frame before the image returned, empty, the forest once again still. By 3 a.m., the camp was silent except for the low whisper of the creek. The red light on the camera continued to blink, steady and calm, as if nothing had happened. But in the darkness between the trees, something unseen remained waiting, breathing, watching. The fire had burned down to its final embers, thin lines of smoke curling into the cool night air. A faint mist rolled through the clearing, clinging low to the ground like a pale veil. The only sounds were the soft hum of insects and the occasional snap of cooling wood. Inside their tents, the group lay scattered in uneasy sleep, exhausted, unaware of what the cameras were quietly capturing just a few yards away. Sometime after 2:30 in the morning, the motion sensor camera blinked awake. Its lens adjusted automatically, cutting through the dark with a faint green tint. For a moment, the frame showed nothing but the empty forest trees swaying slightly, the rhythm of the creek steady as breathing. Then, something passed between the trunks. It moved slowly, almost cautiously, as though testing each step. The figure was tall, its outline narrow, blending with the darkness. It paused at the edge of the clearing, just far enough that its features remained hidden. For several seconds, the camera focused on that spot, until the figure tilted its head, almost curiously, toward the tents. The lens caught a flicker of reflection, eyes not glowing, but reflecting the faintest light from the dying fire. They didn't blink. At 2:47 a.m., the camera picked up a sound, a quiet dragging noise, like fabric brushing across the ground. Then came a soft metallic clink, one of the tent zippers twitching just slightly. Inside, Mara stirred, whispering Eli's name in her sleep. He didn't answer. Connor shifted, muttering something incoherent, his flashlight still beside him, unlit. The sound came again, closer this time. A careful, deliberate motion. Then, silence. The recording wavered for a moment, the image flickering as if something passed too near the lens. When the focus cleared, the figure was gone. Only the empty campsite remained, the tent's dim shapes under the canopy. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Minutes passed. Then, at exactly 2:50 a.m., a faint ripple of movement appeared again, not on the ground, but higher, among the branches. Something dark shifted between the trees, too fast and too quiet to be wind. The camera's sensor struggled to follow it, the frame trembling as the object dropped suddenly back to the forest floor. A new noise filled the air, low and rhythmic, almost like humming. It wasn't a melody, more a broken vibration, uneven and hollow. The pitch rose and fell, echoing faintly against the trees. Inside her tent, Mara's eyes snapped open. Her heart pounded as she listened. The sound was faint, but close, uncomfortably close. She reached for Eli's arm, whispering his name again. He stirred this time, blinking in confusion. Before he could speak, a faint shadow passed across the fabric wall of their tent, a shape blocking the light from the dying embers outside. They froze. The shape lingered, then moved away, silent as smoke. Eli slowly unzipped the tent just an inch, peering out. The clearing was empty. His camera still blinked red in the distance, recording faithfully. He stared toward the trees, scanning for movement, but saw nothing. After a moment, he zipped the tent back up and whispered that it was probably an animal. Mara didn't respond. She turned away, her eyes wide open in the dark. Out near the second camera, the lens caught one last disturbance. The figure now closer appeared again, this time crouched beside the small motion sensor device. The image distorted slightly, the edges bending as though the air itself wavered. Then came a brief, unmistakable glimpse. A hand, long and pale, reaching out toward the camera. For a single frame, the face came into view, not clear, but near enough that its features could be sensed more than seen. Hollow eyes, no visible pupils, a mouth slightly open as if inhaling. The image cut to static. When the picture returned, the fire was gone, the clearing half swallowed in fog. The camera still recorded, but everything was still again, no voices, no movement, just the slow trickle of water and the whisper of leaves in the cold dawn wind. By the time the first light touched the trees, the night's visitor had vanished. Only the footprints near the tents remained faint, deep, and pointed in no direction anyone could understand. Morning came without the warmth they expected. The forest, once golden and alive, now felt muted gray light filtering through a thin fog that clung to everything. The air was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of wet ash from the fire that had died hours earlier. No one spoke at first. It was as if the night had stolen their voices. Eli was the first to unzip his tent. The sound startled even him, too sharp in the stillness. He stepped out slowly, blinking at the pale dawn. The camp looked ordinary at a glance. Tents, the remains of the fire, their gear stacked near the logs. But as he moved closer, small details began to surface, the kind that prick at the back of the mind. The ground around the fire pit was disturbed, the soil pressed with impressions that didn't match their boots. A few were narrow, long, spaced unevenly, as if made by someone dragging their feet. Beside Mara's tent, a shoe was missing. The other sat upright, damp, and half covered in leaves. Connor crawled out next, yawning before noticing Eli's expression. His grin faded. He knelt, touching one of the prints in the dirt. "Could have been an animal," he said softly, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe a deer." Mara emerged last, wrapping her jacket tight around her shoulders. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She looked around the clearing for a long moment before whispering, "Did you hear something last night?" Eli hesitated, then nodded once. "I thought it was the wind." They packed in silence, their usual chatter gone. Connor tried to play music on his phone, but there was no signal. Even the forest seemed unwilling to fill the quiet. The birds stayed hidden, and the creek sounded distant, thinner than before. When everything was loaded into the car, Eli picked up the motion camera from the far side of the clearing. Its small indicator light was still blinking. He turned it over in his hand, wiping off a thin layer of dew. The memory card was full. For a brief second, he considered deleting the illusion footage without looking. But curiosity, that same force that had brought them here, won out. They decided to review it back at home, where it would feel safer. Still, as they walked away, Mara kept glancing behind her. She swore she could hear something following them, soft steps syncing with her own until the path widened and the car came into view. The drive back to town was quiet. The sun rose higher, but the light seemed pale, washed out. No one looked out the window. That afternoon, inside Eli's small room, they gathered around his laptop. He connected the camera, opened the files, and pressed play. The first hours were ordinary: the fire, their laughter, the calm rhythm of night. Then came the static. As the screen flickered, Mara's hand went to her mouth. Connor froze, eyes fixed on the shape moving in the dark. The footage ended abruptly, the final frame showing something close to the lens, a blurred face, expressionless, almost human. No one spoke. Eli closed the laptop slowly. The room felt colder. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, soft, steady, and eerily familiar, like breathing. When the three of them got back to town, everything felt oddly ordinary. Cars passed by, coffee shops were open, and people moved about as if nothing had happened. Yet for Ethan, Mia, and Leo, nothing felt the same. The trip that had begun as a fun weekend adventure now lingered in their minds like a shadow they couldn't shake off. They didn't talk much on the drive back. The car radio played quietly, the sound blending with the hum of the road. Occasionally, Leo glanced at the small camera bag resting on the back seat, the same camera that had captured whatever had happened the night before. None of them dared to open it. Not yet. When they finally arrived at Ethan's apartment, where they usually edited their vlogs, a strange silence filled the room. The laughter and energy that usually came with their video projects were gone. This time, it felt like they were about to open something they shouldn't. Mia plugged in the memory card. The computer screen flickered to life, and the folder of raw footage appeared. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ethan clicked on the first file, the one labeled Nightcam 0. At first, everything looked normal. The campfire, the tents, the three of them laughing, talking about the stars, teasing each other about who would fall asleep first. But then, as the camera kept rolling, a shape began to form at the edge of the frame, dark, still, barely visible among the trees. They watched closely. The figure didn't move, but its outline grew sharper as the minutes passed. It seemed to be standing just beyond the firelight, where shadows swallowed everything. And then, around 2:47 a.m., it shifted, not toward the camera, but slightly to the side, as if it were circling. Leo paused the video. His voice trembled. "Is that a person?" Mia leaned closer, her heartbeat pounding in her chest. "No one was out there, I swear. We would have heard something." Ethan didn't respond. He scrubbed forward a few frames. The figure vanished for a moment, only to reappear closer, its form now half caught in the glow of the fire. The camera lens seemed to flicker, the focus twitching as if reacting to motion. And then came a sound, soft, almost a whisper, barely audible through the static. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was something human. The three of them sat frozen, eyes fixed on the screen. The footage ended with the camera tipping slightly, as if something brushed past it. Then the image cut to black. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, Mia closed the laptop and whispered, "We shouldn't upload this." Ethan nodded slowly, though his gaze lingered on the camera. No one would believe it anyway. But Leo looked uneasy. What if it's still out there? For days afterward, they tried to move on, posting old clips, pretending everything was fine. But each of them knew they had seen something real. And every night since, when Ethan closed his eyes, he could still picture that shadow standing at the edge of the firelight watching. And deep down, he couldn't help but wonder if, just maybe, it hadn't stayed in the forest at all. A week passed, yet none of them dared to watch the footage again. The camera stayed locked inside a drawer in Ethan's apartment. Its small red recording light still burned faintly from the last charge, as if it refused to rest. Mia stopped replying in their group chat after the third day. She said she was fine, just tired, trying to focus on editing old content, but her messages grew shorter, then vanished entirely. Leo tried to visit her once, but when he knocked on her door, there was no answer. The curtains were drawn, and from the street below, he could see her living room light flickering on and off at strange intervals. Ethan barely slept. Sometimes, when he scrolled through their channel, he would catch himself staring at their banner photo, the three of them standing by the lake, smiling, unaware of what waited for them that night. He thought about deleting the footage, erasing it all, but each time, something stopped him. A quiet pull, as if the forest itself didn't want to be forgotten. Then one evening, a notification appeared on their channel. New upload, Nightcam 0. Ethan froze. His stomach turned cold. He hadn't uploaded anything. He hadn't even opened the drawer. Yet, when he clicked on the video, there it was, the same footage. Only this time, it was longer. The timer extended past the point where the screen had gone black. At first, it showed the empty campsite. The fire had died, leaving nothing but ash. The camera lay tilted, half buried in dirt. Then, slowly, a faint sound rose, a breath, soft and close to the microphone. The screen shook slightly, as if something or someone had picked the camera up. It turned toward the woods. For a moment, the frame went dark. And then, through the branches, a pale reflection appeared, 3 silhouettes standing by the extinguished fire, still, silent, watching. Ethan slammed his laptop shut. His hands trembled as he pulled the plug from the wall, but the faint hum of the hard drive continued, as if it were breathing. Outside, the night wind carried the distant call of something that sounded almost like laughter. And somewhere, deep within the forest where their story had begun, a red light blinked, once more recording.